Hey there, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Legends and Lore, where we dive deep into history's strangest mysteries, eerie encounters, and the legends that just won't fade away. I'm your host, David Culpepper, and as always, I've got my two faithful co-hosts, May and Huck, my German shepherds, keeping me company. Now, I'd like to say they're here for moral support, but let's be honest, they're mostly here to make sure I don't forget their snack breaks. Of course, I'd love to believe that they're my own personal ghost ship detectors, sniffing out any strange energies lurking around while I record. If I suddenly stop talking mid-sentence, just assume they've picked up on something that I can't see. And if they start growling, well, I guess we'll all find out together what's lurking in the shadows. Thank you for the reactions and messages about last week's episode, the Dyatlov Pass incident. That one still has me thinking. As always, hit me up on X at David Culpepper if you have something you want to share, especially if you have your own theory about what happened out there. Now, today's episode is one I've been really looking forward to. It's one of the greatest unsolved maritime mysteries of all time, the Mary Celeste, the infamous ghost ship of the Atlantic. It's the kind of story that sticks with you, the kind that makes you wonder just what could have happened out there in the vast, unforgiving ocean. Because here's the thing, the Mary Celeste wasn't a shipwreck. It wasn't found smashed on some jagged rocks or swallowed by a storm. No, it was perfectly intact, drifting through the waves. Its crew mysteriously vanished without a trace. Imagine that for a second. A ship, its cargo untouched, its supplies still there. Half-eaten meals left as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. But they never came back. No sign of a struggle, no distress calls, no clear reason for why they abandoned the vessel. It was as if they had simply disappeared. And for over 150 years, we've been trying to figure out why. There's something about ghost ships that taps into a very specific kind of fear, isn't there? The ocean is already one of the most mysterious places on Earth, vast, deep, and unpredictable. But when you throw in an abandoned ship with a missing crew, it turns into something else entirely. A story that doesn't just feel eerie, it feels wrong, because ships aren't supposed to be empty. The sea is dangerous, sure, but when people disappear without a trace, leaving behind no clues, that's when our imaginations start filling in the gaps. Ghost ships have appeared throughout history, from the legendary Flying Dutchman to modern cases where ships have been found mysteriously abandoned, their crews missing. But the Mary Celeste isn't just another sea tale. It's the ghost ship mystery. It's real, it's documented, and it remains unsolved. So tonight we're going to retrace the final voyage of the Mary Celeste, step by step. We'll start with the crew, who they were, why they set sail, and what kind of journey they expected to have. We'll break down the eerie discovery of the ship drifting alone in the Atlantic, and of course we'll dive into the theories. Everything from logical, scientific explanations to the more outlandish possibilities that have kept this mystery alive for more than a century. Was it a natural disaster? Freak accident that forced the crew to flee? Or was it something more sinister? Mutiny, foul play, or even a cover-up? And then, of course, there are the more unconventional theories. Did the Mary Celeste fall victim to a Bermuda Triangle-style event despite being nowhere near it? Could it have been visited by something not of this world? Or was it simply a case of human error that spiraled into one of history's greatest mysteries? Whatever the truth may be, the Mary Celeste remains one of the most chilling real-life ghost stories ever told. So, grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and let's set sail into the unknown. Picture this. It's December 5th, 1872. The Dei Gratia, a sturdy little brigantine, is making its way across the Atlantic under the command of Captain David Morehouse. The journey has been routine, the sea fairly cooperative, just another long stretch of open water between Portugal and the Azores. But then something unusual appears on the horizon. A ship, its sails billowing oddly in the wind. The Dei Gratia's crew watches it for a moment, waiting to see if there's any sign of life, any flicker of movement on board. But there's nothing. No signal, no sign that anyone is steering it. Just a ship, rocking aimlessly on the waves. It's an eerie sight. A vessel without a captain is never a good omen. The sea is unpredictable, sure, but ships don't just drift like that unless something has gone terribly wrong. Morehouse, an experienced seaman, knows that. He orders the Dei Gratia to cautiously approach. As they draw nearer, the Dei Gratia's crew gets a better look. The ship is the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that had set sail from New York just a month earlier, bound for Genoa, Italy. Morehouse had actually met the Mary Celeste's captain, Benjamin Briggs, back in New York, a respectable seasoned sailor. And yet, here was his ship, completely abandoned in the middle of the ocean. Something wasn't right. The Mary Celeste was still in good shape. She hadn't been battered by a storm or ransacked by pirates. Her sails, however, were in disarray. Some were torn, others left hanging loosely, flapping uselessly in the wind. Her rigging was damaged, but not enough to suggest a major catastrophe. What struck Morehouse and his crew as particularly odd was that there was no distress signal, no sign that anyone had even attempted to call for help. It was as if the ship had been left to drift deliberately. Morehouse sends a few of his men to board the Mary Celeste. As they climb aboard, the first thing they notice is the unnatural silence. A ship, even one at rest, should feel alive. The creak of footsteps and the rustle of sails, the hum of a crew at work. But here there is nothing, just the hollow groan of the timbers beneath their feet. They search the deck. No one, no bodies, no signs of struggle. The lifeboat is missing, but everything else seems untouched. The hatch to the cargo hold is secured, and when they check inside, they find all 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol intact. The crew's personal belongings? Still there. Clothes neatly folded, pipes, notebooks, even a sewing kit left undisturbed, as if their owners had simply stepped away for a moment expecting to return. And then in the galley, perhaps the most chilling detail of all, a meal, half-eaten, plates set at the table, a breakfast abandoned mid-bite, as if the crew had vanished in an instant. In the captain's quarters, the logbook is found, its last entry dated November the 25th, 9 days earlier. There's nothing in it that suggests trouble. No warnings, no signs of distress, just the mundane details of a ship on course, making steady progress toward its destination. And yet, here they were, drifting in open water, with no one aboard to explain why. Morehouse's men move below deck, checking every corner, every passage. They find no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. The hull is solid. There's no major damage, no evidence of flooding or fire. But something is missing. The lifeboat. Had the crew abandoned ship? And if so, why? The Mary Celeste was a sturdy vessel. She wasn't sinking, and there was no immediate sign of catastrophe. Yet, for some reason, Captain Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the entire crew had chosen to leave her behind. But if they had left voluntarily, where did they go? Why didn't they take provisions? Why didn't they return? And if they didn't leave voluntarily, then what exactly happened on board? And just like that, one of history's most enduring maritime mysteries was born. A perfectly seaworthy ship, drifting empty in the vast Atlantic, with no living soul to tell its tale. Before we go any further into the mystery of the Mary Celeste, let's take a step back and talk about the people who were aboard her, because at the heart of this legend, beneath all the speculation, the eerie discoveries, and the theories, was a group of real people. They had families, routines, plans for the future. And yet, whatever happened out there on the Atlantic, it erased them from history, leaving nothing behind but their empty ship and unanswered questions. At the helm of the Mary Celeste was Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man who, by all accounts, was as steady and disciplined as they came. Born in Massachusetts in 1835, Briggs was a deeply religious, highly experienced mariner, the kind of captain who ran a tight but fair ship. He wasn't reckless, wasn't the type to take unnecessary risks. If anything, he was known for being cautious, almost meticulous, when it came to navigating the dangers of the sea. And that makes his disappearance all the more strange. This wasn't an inexperienced sailor who might have made some critical mistake. Briggs knew the ocean. He had been sailing for most of his life. He had captained multiple vessels before, and by the time he took charge of the Mary Celeste, he was regarded as one of the most reliable men on the water. In fact, he was so confident in this voyage that he brought along the two people he loved most, his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Now, if you know anything about 19th century seafaring, you'll know that bringing your family aboard was not common practice, especially on a merchant vessel. It was dangerous, unpredictable. Life at sea was rough, and many captains left their families behind for months at a time. But Briggs must have felt that this particular trip was safe enough. Maybe it was a chance for them to be together. Maybe he had plans to settle in Italy for a time. We don't know for sure. All we know is that Sarah and Sophia were there, along with the crew, when the Mary Celeste sailed into history. Alongside Briggs and his family, the Mary Celeste had a small but highly competent crew, 7 men, all of whom had been carefully selected for this voyage. There were no reports of tension among them, no history of mutiny or desertion. These were seasoned sailors accustomed to life at sea, and none of them seemed likely candidates for anything reckless or violent. The first mate, Albert Richardson, was Briggs's right-hand man, skilled, trustworthy, and a long-time seaman. The second mate, Andrew Gilling, was described as a good sailor, though a bit quiet. The steward, Edward Head, was young but competent. The rest of the crew, 4 German seamen, all experienced sailors, rounded out the team. They weren't strangers thrown together at the last minute. This was a hand-picked group that Briggs believed he could rely on. And that's important to keep in mind, because one of the first things people assume when a ship is found abandoned is that something must have happened between the crew. A fight, a mutiny, some moment of chaos. But there was no history of violence or instability among these men. They had every reason to want this voyage to succeed. On November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste set sail from New York Harbor, bound for Genoa, Italy. The ship was carrying 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, a valuable but highly flammable cargo. The voyage should have taken about a month, give or take, depending on the weather. The ship itself was in good condition, not a brand new vessel, but well maintained. She had been recently refitted before this voyage, and everything suggested that it would be an uneventful crossing. Briggs had written to his mother just before leaving, saying that he felt optimistic about the trip. There was nothing unusual, nothing to suggest that he was worried about anything at all. But somewhere between that confident departure and the moment she was found drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic, something went terribly wrong. One of the most haunting aspects of this mystery is the ship's logbook, essentially the captain's daily record of the voyage. When the Dei Gratia crew found it, they discovered that the last entry had been written on November the 25th, just 9 days before the ship was found adrift. And what's truly eerie, there was nothing in those final entries to indicate any trouble. The last few pages describe normal sailing conditions, daily routines, steady progress across the Atlantic. No storms, no accidents, no warnings. The last recorded position placed them about 400 nautical miles from where the Mary Celeste was eventually found, and then, just like that, the entries stopped. No final message, no distress call, just silence. And that's one of the things that makes this case so unsettling. If there had been a storm, if the ship had been sinking, if pirates had attacked, there should have been some sign of it. A rushed, desperate entry, a frantic note scribbled by a terrified crew member. But there was nothing. It was as if, one moment, the Mary Celeste was sailing as expected, and the next, her crew was simply gone. So what happened in those missing 9 days? What could make an experienced captain and his entire crew abandon a ship that was still fully functional? Was it fear? Was it something they saw? Or was there something else at play, something we still don't understand? When the Dei Gratia crew found the Mary Celeste drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic, they knew they had stumbled upon something strange. But what they didn't know was that their discovery would set off one of the most controversial and perplexing investigations in maritime history. Because as soon as they brought the ship into port, questions started flying, and so did the accusations. After finding the Mary Celeste abandoned, Captain Morehouse and his crew did what any sailors would do in such a situation. They claimed salvage rights. Under maritime law, if you find a ship adrift at sea and successfully bring it into port, you're entitled to a reward based on the value of the vessel and its cargo. It was standard practice, but in this case, the circumstances were anything but standard. When Morehouse and his men towed the Mary Celeste into Gibraltar on December 13th, 1872, the British authorities weren't just intrigued, they were suspicious. Why would a perfectly functional ship be abandoned in the middle of the ocean? And why had Morehouse and his crew been the ones to find it? Some started whispering about foul play. Had the Dei Gratia crew staged the whole thing to cash in on a lucrative salvage claim? Now, it's easy to see why these suspicions arose. Morehouse knew Captain Briggs personally. They had both set sail from New York around the same time, traveling similar routes. Could he have intercepted the Mary Celeste in open water, killed the crew, and made it look like a mystery to collect the reward? It's a juicy theory, but there was zero evidence to support it. The Mary Celeste had no signs of violence, no blood, no damage, no bodies thrown overboard. The ship's cargo was completely untouched. If Morehouse and his men had planned some elaborate crime, why leave 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol completely intact? If robbery was the goal, they had failed spectacularly. As the investigation continued, authorities started ruling things out. First on the list, mutiny. There was no sign of a struggle, no personal belongings rifled through, no indication that a fight had broken out among the crew. Captain Briggs was known to be firm but fair. He wasn't the kind of captain to push his men toward the rebellion. Piracy was the next logical theory. The open sea wasn't exactly free from danger. Pirates had been known to ambush merchant vessels, either killing or capturing crews and making off with valuable cargo. But again, there was no sign of an attack. The cargo hold remained locked and secure. The crew's personal items, watches, pipes, money, were all left behind. And here's where things get even stranger. If pirates had attacked, they wouldn't have taken the ship's only lifeboat. They would have taken the ship itself, or at least left it in a state of chaos. But the Mary Celeste, she looked as if she had simply been abandoned, as if her crew had willingly stepped off the ship into the unknown. Next, investigators examined the ship itself, looking for any mechanical failure that might have forced an evacuation. Had she started taking on water? Had there been a fire, some catastrophic failure? But, no. The Mary Celeste was still seaworthy. Her hull was strong, intact. There was no sign of an explosion, no structural damage, no fire. If the ship had been in danger, it certainly wasn't by the time it was found. One by one, the most obvious explanations were crossed off the list, and that's when the real mystery started to sink in. If there was no mutiny, no pirate attack, no storm, and no mechanical failure, then what had driven an entire crew to abandon a perfectly functional ship in the middle of the Atlantic? One of the only tangible clues in this entire case was the missing lifeboat. If the crew of the Mary Celeste had left the ship, they had done so in a single small boat, adrift in the open ocean. And that raises a terrifying question. What could have possibly made them so afraid that they believed leaving the ship was their best option? This was not a crew of inexperienced sailors. Briggs was a man who knew the dangers of the sea. He wouldn't have taken his wife, his daughter, and his crew into a lifeboat unless he was absolutely convinced that staying aboard the Mary Celeste was even more dangerous. But the key problem with this theory is that there was no reason to leave the ship. The weather was calm, the ship was intact. If they had left, why didn't they return? What could have possibly kept them away? And that's where the real speculation begins. Did they see something? Did they experience something so strange, so terrifying, that their only instinct was to flee? Or was it something else? A slow-building crisis, a moment of panic that spiraled out of control? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. They were never seen again. Not a single member of the Mary Celeste's crew was ever found. No lifeboat washed ashore. No remains were ever discovered. It was as if they had been swallowed by the ocean itself, leaving behind nothing but their empty ship to drift through history. And that, my friends, is where the legend of the Mary Celeste truly begins. Because with no clear answers, we're left only with theories. Some grounded in reason, others reaching into the realm of the bizarre, and next we'll be exploring them all. When we look at what might have happened aboard the Mary Celeste, one of the most reasonable places to start is nature itself. After all, the open sea is unpredictable. It can turn from calm to chaos in an instant. Sailors have always lived at the mercy of the elements, and throughout history, ships have been swallowed whole by storms, rogue waves, and strange weather events. But here's where things get interesting. The Mary Celeste wasn't destroyed. She was found completely intact, no major damage, no signs of a violent storm battering her. So if we're going to say that weather played a role, we have to consider not just what could have happened, but whether the ship's condition actually supports that idea. One of the most commonly suggested natural explanations is a waterspout, essentially a tornado over the ocean. Waterspouts can be violent, sudden, and terrifying, especially for sailors who have no warning before one appears. If a waterspout had formed near the Mary Celeste, it could have created massive updrafts and vacuum effects, shaking the ship violently, damaging the rigging, and maybe even lifting seawater onto the deck. Imagine this. You're on deck and suddenly the wind picks up, the sky darkens, and a swirling column of water stretches from sea to sky. The ocean is being sucked into the air around you, and the ship begins to shudder. Maybe a crew member screams. Maybe Captain Briggs, thinking the ship is about to be pulled under, gives the order to abandon ship. In a moment of sheer panic, they launch the lifeboat, only to realize too late that they've made a mistake. It's not impossible. But here's the problem. When the Dei Gratia crew found the Mary Celeste, there was no clear evidence of a waterspout hitting the ship. The sails were damaged, yes, but not shredded. The cargo hold was dry. If a waterspout had passed directly over them, we'd expect more obvious wreckage, toppled masts, flooding, or debris scattered across the deck. Instead, the ship seemed oddly untouched. Then there's the idea of a rogue wave, a sudden towering wall of water that can rise up seemingly out of nowhere, slamming into a ship with unimaginable force. Rogue waves have been known to reach heights of over 80 feet, and they've sunk modern ships in a matter of seconds. If one of these waves had hit the Mary Celeste, it could have caused extreme instability, knocking the crew overboard or forcing them to evacuate in a panic. But again, the ship was still there, the cargo was still intact, the deck wasn't splintered, the hull wasn't breached. There was no sign that a massive wall of water had just crashed into it. It's possible that a large wave swept across the deck, scaring the crew into thinking the ship was about to sink. Maybe they launched the lifeboat, thinking they were seconds away from disaster, only for the ship to right itself and continue floating, while they were left stranded, lost at sea. But if that's what happened, where was the lifeboat? Why didn't they try to return? And if they were so worried about the ship sinking, why didn't they take more supplies with them? Something still doesn't add up. Another theory suggests that the crew didn't experience a natural disaster directly, but that they feared one was coming. There have been cases where sailors, believing a tsunami or massive storm was approaching, abandoned ship preemptively, only to realize too late that they were safer staying aboard. Tsunamis in particular are interesting to consider here. Unlike typical waves, a tsunami doesn't look like a towering wall of water out in the deep ocean. Instead, it can appear as a rapid, eerie change in sea level, sometimes a sudden drop, sometimes a strange, rising swell that builds unnaturally fast. If the crew had seen something like that, their instinct might have been to get away from the ship before it was dragged under. But the problem with this idea? Tsunamis usually happen after underwater earthquakes, and there was no recorded seismic activity in that region at the time. Even if there had been an underwater landslide that caused a localized disturbance, we would expect to see some evidence, unusual debris, more reports from nearby ships. At best, this theory relies on the idea that the crew thought something terrible was coming, even if it wasn't. All of these theories, waterspouts, rogue waves, tsunamis, require one major assumption: that the Mary Celeste was in immediate danger. That the crew, despite their experience, became so convinced that they needed to flee that they took the lifeboat and never returned. But here's where we hit the biggest problem. There was no recorded storm, no seismic activity, No reported rogue waves or unusual swells in that area, and the ship was still floating intact without any real damage. It's hard to believe that every single person on board, including an experienced captain like Briggs, would make the same mistake, choosing to abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship. The ocean is terrifying, yes, but sailors don't just jump into lifeboats over nothing. And even if they had made a rash decision in the heat of the moment, where did they go? There were no survivors, no reports of a drifting lifeboat, no bodies ever recovered. If a rogue wave had knocked them overboard, we'd expect some wreckage, some evidence that a disaster had taken place. But there was nothing. And that's where this theory falls apart. Yes, the ocean is unpredictable. Yes, fear can drive people to make irrational choices. But nothing about the condition of the Mary Celeste suggests they needed to abandon ship. So if the crew didn't leave because of a storm, a tsunami, or a freak wave, then why did they leave at all? What made them decide that stepping into that lifeboat, into the unknown, was a better option than staying aboard their own ship? That's where we start moving into some of the more unusual theories. Maybe it wasn't the ocean that forced them off the ship. Maybe it was something else. If you're looking for a theory that offers a somewhat logical, but still eerie, explanation for the disappearance of the Mary Celeste's crew, this next one might just be it. Unlike the idea of a freak storm or rogue wave, this theory suggests that the real danger wasn't outside the ship. It was locked below deck, quietly waiting in the cargo hold. When the Mary Celeste set sail from New York on November 7th, 1872, she was carrying 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. Now, this wasn't your average shipment of whiskey or rum. This was highly flammable, highly volatile ethanol, the kind used for cleaning, manufacturing, and other industrial purposes. If handled improperly, it could be dangerous, not just as a fire hazard, but as a potential cause for panic. And here's where things get interesting. Of those 1,700 barrels, 9 were later found to be empty. Could something have happened inside the cargo hold that made the crew believe they were in immediate danger? Could an invisible threat, alcohol vapors, seeping up through the deck boards, have forced them into a desperate escape? Let's break this theory down piece by piece. Ethanol is a volatile substance, meaning it evaporates quickly, especially in warm conditions. If some of those barrels had started leaking, the fumes could have built up in the confined space of the cargo hold, creating an invisible explosive hazard. Now, imagine you're Captain Briggs. You're walking the deck when you suddenly catch a strong chemical smell. Maybe a crew member reports a burning sensation in their eyes, or dizziness, or nausea. You know the dangers of industrial alcohol, and you know that if the fumes build up too much, one stray spark from a lantern, a pipe, or even static electricity could turn the Mary Celeste into a floating inferno. So what do? You act fast. Maybe you order the hatches open to ventilate the hold. Maybe the crew panics, fearing the ship is about to explode, and they rush to abandon ship, lowering the lifeboat with the intention of waiting it out at a safe distance. It makes sense, doesn't it? It explains why the crew would leave a perfectly functional ship in a hurry. But it also raises some trouble and questions. There's speculation that Briggs, realizing the danger, may have attempted a controlled ventilation, opening the hatches to let the vapors escape safely. If he believed the situation was dire, he might have ordered the entire crew off the ship temporarily and thinking they'd return once the risk had passed. And that's where things take a tragic turn. If the crew left in a hurry, did something happen to their lifeboat before they could make it back? Did a sudden wave capsize it? Did strong winds push them too far from the ship, leaving them helpless in the vast Atlantic? If this theory is true, the most heartbreaking part isn't that they fled. It's that they may have realized their mistake too late. Picture it. You're in the lifeboat. The ship that you've just abandoned, your only home, your only hope, doesn't explode. The fumes clear and the Mary Celeste keeps floating, completely unharmed. But by then, the current has carried you too far away. The ship grows smaller and smaller on the horizon, and you realize you're not going to make it back. If that's what happened, then the Mary Celeste wasn't cursed, wasn't attacked, just the victim of a momentary, irreversible mistake. But there are still some problems with this theory. The biggest issue? If there was a major ethanol vapor buildup, why wasn't there an explosion? The Day Gracious crew found the Mary Celeste fully intact. The cargo hold showed no sign of fire, no evidence that the ship had been in any real distress. If the crew had been so afraid of an explosion that they abandoned ship, why hadn't something actually happened? No scorch marks, no damage, no real proof that anything had been wrong at all. And here's another problem. If it was just a temporary fear, why didn't they return? If Captain Briggs had only intended for a brief evacuation, the plan would have been to return once the fumes had dissipated, and yet they never did. No lifeboat was ever found, no survivors ever made it to shore. It's as if they vanished into thin air. It's possible that they drifted too far and couldn't row back. It's possible that they were caught in a sudden storm and lost. But the more we try to make sense of it, the more frustrating this mystery becomes. If this was a simple case of ethanol fumes causing a panicked evacuation, why does it feel like it ended in something more? So where does that leave us? This theory does have merit. It's one of the few explanations that accounts for the missing lifeboat, and it gives us a rational reason for why the crew might have fled. But the gaps in the story still feel too wide. Why didn't anyone return? Why wasn't there a single survivor? And maybe most importantly, if this was really just a case of industrial alcohol fumes scaring the crew off their ship, then why does the Mary Celeste still feel like such a ghost story? When you think of a ship found abandoned at sea, the mind naturally drifts to one explanation: violence. Maybe there was a mutiny, maybe pirates attacked, or maybe, just maybe, someone planned something sinister and got away with it. But if foul play was involved in the Mary Celeste mystery, it would have to be one of the most carefully executed crimes in maritime history. Because no matter how you spin it, there's one major problem. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, no obvious clue that anything violent had ever happened aboard that ship. And yet, this theory remains one of the most persistent, because when all else fails, we tend to suspect each other. Mutiny has been the downfall of many ships throughout history, and at first glance, it seems like a plausible explanation. Maybe the crew turned on Captain Briggs, killed him and his family, and took the lifeboat to escape. But here's where that theory starts to fall apart. First of all, there was no history of tension between Briggs and his men. He was known to be a fair but firm captain, a deeply religious man who believed in discipline but wasn't known for cruelty. This wasn't a case of a ruthless, tyrannical leader pushing his men to the brink. The Mary Celeste's crew was handpicked for this voyage. These weren't criminals or troublemakers. They were experienced sailors, trusted by Briggs to handle a months-long journey across the Atlantic. And yet, When the ship was found, there was no sign of a fight, and the captain's quarters weren't ransacked. There were no weapons out of place, no signs of a last stand, no spilled blood soaking into the wooden planks. If the crew had mutinied, they must have done so with eerie precision and then vanished without a trace. No lifeboat was ever recovered. No sailor turned up in a port somewhere with a suspicious story. It's as if, whatever happened, the men themselves were swallowed by the ocean, along with the truth. Piracy. The classic seafaring danger. A rogue ship emerging from the fog, bandits boarding in the dead of night, cutting down the crew and making off with their stolen loot. Sounds like a solid explanation, right? Well, not exactly. First off, the Mary Celeste was found completely intact, with its entire cargo untouched. Pirates, especially in the 19th century, weren't known for being choosy about what they stole. If they had attacked the ship, they would have taken something. They wouldn't have left behind 1,700 barrels of valuable industrial alcohol. And let's talk location. The ship was found drifting between Portugal and the Azores, an area not particularly known for pirate activity at the time. The golden age of piracy, the era of Blackbeard, Captain Kidd, and their cutthroat brethren, had ended long before. By 1872, piracy still existed, but it was more common in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea, not the North Atlantic. And then there's the biggest problem with this theory. If pirates had attacked the Mary Celeste, where was the violence? There were no bullet holes, no cut ropes, no bloodstains, nothing to suggest a struggle. If the crew had been forced into the lifeboat, why didn't they fight back? And why, after taking the ship, would the pirates just abandon it and let it drift? No, the evidence, or lack thereof, makes it very hard to believe that pirates were behind this mystery. If the Mary Celeste was attacked, it was by an enemy that left no trace. And that brings us to one of the most controversial theories of all. When the Mary Celeste was found and towed to Gibraltar, suspicion quickly turned toward the very people who discovered it, Captain Morehouse and the crew of the Dei Gratia. After all, in maritime law, finding an abandoned ship meant salvage rights, a hefty payout depending on the value of the ship and its cargo. Was it possible that Morehouse and his men staged the whole thing? Let's play devil's advocate here. We know that Morehouse knew Captain Briggs personally. The two had met in New York before their respective voyages, meaning Morehouse knew about the Mary Celeste's route, cargo, and departure schedule. Some have speculated that Morehouse and his crew intercepted the Mary Celeste at sea, forced Briggs and his crew overboard, and staged the abandoned ship to make it look like a mystery, all for the salvage reward. Sounds dramatic, right? But there's zero evidence to support it. First off, Morehouse and his crew stood to make money regardless. The Mary Celeste was valuable, yes, but if this was an elaborate crime, it was an incredibly risky one. For this to have worked, they would have needed to cover their tracks flawlessly. No witnesses, no stray belongings, no bodies, no loose ends. And even if they had pulled it off, they didn't actually make a fortune. The salvage court in Gibraltar was deeply suspicious of Morehouse's claim, and after weeks of investigation, the payout they received was far lower than expected, just a fraction of what they could have made from an honest job. So while it's true that Morehouse and his crew benefited from finding the Mary Celeste, the idea that they orchestrated the entire thing feels far-fetched. It's a theory built on coincidence, not on evidence. So what do we make of all this? The human factor, mutiny, murder, piracy, fraud, is one of the most tempting explanations for the Mary Celeste. It's human nature to suspect each other before we suspect the supernatural. But in this case, there's a problem. There's just no proof. No missing cargo, no signs of violence, no motive that makes perfect sense. It's not that foul play is impossible, but when you really examine the evidence, it just doesn't hold water. And if it wasn't human hands that led to the disappearance of the crew, then what was it? Was there something else out there? Something they couldn't explain? Because as strange as these theories are, we're about to enter the realm of something even stranger, the paranormal. We've spent a lot of time exploring the logical explanations, the idea that the Mary Celeste was abandoned because of a natural disaster, a mechanical failure, or even an act of human violence. But what if none of those explanations tell the whole story? What if the real reason the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the Atlantic isn't something we can explain with science or reason? Because for as long as there have been ships, there have been ghost stories. Sailors have always believed that the sea holds secrets, some that can be understood and some that never will. And when it comes to maritime mysteries, the Mary Celeste has become one of the most infamous ghost ships of all time. There's something about an empty ship drifting on open water that taps into a very particular kind of fear. A ship is meant to be full of life, full of voices, full of movement. But the Mary Celeste wasn't just empty. It was abandoned in a way that made no sense. The food was still set on the table. The cargo was untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of disaster, just silence. This eerie discovery transformed the Mary Celeste into something more than just a lost vessel. Over time, it became a legend, a ghost ship that would forever sail the ocean in our imaginations. In fact, some sailors believed that the ship had become cursed, that whatever force had taken its crew never let go. And that raises a chilling possibility. Did the crew of the Mary Celeste vanish not because of a storm, or alcohol fumes, or mutiny, but because of something supernatural? Some legends suggest that the Mary Celeste became a ship lost between worlds, stuck in a kind of purgatory, forever searching for its lost crew. Others whisper that the ship was caught in a rift in time, one that swallowed the crew but left the ship behind. And then, of course, there's the possibility that the crew wasn't lost at all, but that they were taken. Now, whenever you mention an abandoned ship, you can bet that someone is going to bring up the Bermuda Triangle, that strange, infamous stretch of ocean where ships and planes are said to disappear without explanation. Here's the thing, the Mary Celeste wasn't anywhere near the Bermuda Triangle. It was found thousands of miles away from that region, but that hasn't stopped some theorists from trying to connect the two. Some believe that the forces at work in the Bermuda Triangle, a magnetic anomaly, a temporal disturbance, or even an interdimensional rift, aren't confined to just one area. Could the Mary Celeste have sailed into an invisible portal, one that claimed its crew, leaving only an empty ship behind? That sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel. But consider this. The crew vanished without a trace. No bodies, no wreckage, no sign of where they went. Just gone. That's the kind of detail that makes people wonder if there was something else at play. And that brings us to the stranger theories, the ones that push the limits of what we believe is possible. Because if we're talking about mysteries of the deep, well, why stop at the natural world? Let's talk about sea monsters. For centuries, sailors have told stories of colossal creatures lurking beneath the waves, creatures so massive they could swallow entire ships whole. The kraken, the Leviathan, the Lusca. Could the Mary Celeste have been attacked by something living in the deep? Some have speculated that a giant sea creature, maybe an undiscovered species, rose from the depths, startling the crew into fleeing the ship in terror. The lifeboat, caught in the monster's grasp, was dragged beneath the waves, leaving no trace behind. Now, is this likely? Well, no, the Mary Celeste had no signs of damage, no massive tentacle marks on the hull, no splintered wood. But that hasn't stopped cryptid enthusiasts from wondering if something big was lurking beneath them that day. But if sea monsters aren't your thing, what about aliens? Yep, I said it, UFOs. There have been numerous accounts of strange lights appearing over the ocean. Some sailors have reported ships being followed by glowing orbs, objects that hover just above the water before vanishing into the sky. Could the Mary Celeste have encountered something from beyond our world? Something that took the crew, leaving only their ship behind? And if that sounds far-fetched, let me remind you, entire modern Navy pilots have reported UFOs over the ocean. We still don't know what's out there. And maybe, just maybe, something out there was watching that ship. And then there's the time warp theory. Some believe that certain areas of the ocean are unstable, that there are hidden rifts in time itself. Imagine sailing into a patch of water that doesn't follow the rules of reality. Maybe the Mary Celeste drifted into one of these anomalies, and for the crew, time shifted. They stepped off the ship into another time, another place, while the ship itself remained behind, waiting to be found. Sounds impossible? Maybe. But when a ship is found perfectly intact, yet completely abandoned, theories like this don't seem so crazy, because the alternative is even more unsettling. That whatever happened to the Mary Celeste was something we still can't explain. We've explored the facts, the theories, and even the more out there explanations for what happened to the Mary Celeste. But as much as this is a real mystery, it's also become something more than that. Over the last 150 years, the Mary Celeste has transcended history and become legend. It's not just a ship. It's a story, one that has been retold, reshaped, and expanded upon in books, movies, and folklore. And in the process, the Mary Celeste has become the ghost ship, the one that comes to mind when people think of a vessel found mysteriously adrift, its crew vanished without a trace. But how did this story go from an unsolved maritime mystery to a cultural icon? Well, part of the reason is simple. It's just that eerie. But the other part, that's where things get interesting. Since the Mary Celeste was discovered in 1872, it's been the subject of books, movies, TV shows, and even radio dramas. Every generation seems to reinterpret the mystery, adding its own spin. From horror films to adventure novels, the Mary Celeste has inspired countless ghost ship stories. You see echoes of it in everything from Stephen King's horror to Ridley Scott's sci-fi films. The concept of an abandoned vessel, empty but intact, has become a storytelling staple, something that instantly triggers unease. And of course, we can't talk about the Mary Celeste in pop culture without bringing up one of the most influential fictionalized accounts of all time, one that took this story and turned it into a legend. In 1884, just over a decade after the real Mary Celeste was found, a young writer named Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, the man who would later create Sherlock Holmes, wrote a short story called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. This wasn't an attempt to document the facts of the case. It was a fictionalized retelling, a story that took the skeleton of the real Mary Celeste mystery and twisted it into something new. In Doyle's version, the ship was called the Marie Celeste, a small change, but one that confused many readers into thinking his story was the truth. He wrote about an African-American secret society, a murderous crew, and an elaborate conspiracy, none of which had anything to do with the real case. But people latched on to it. And here's the thing, because Doyle would later go on to become one of the most famous mystery writers in history, his version of the Mary Celeste took on a life of its own. It added layers of intrigue that weren't there before, and it blurred the line between fact and fiction. Even today, many people still believe some of the details from Doyle's short story were part of the real case, a testament to how powerful storytelling can be. The Mary Celeste didn't just become a famous mystery. It became part of seafaring folklore. It's the ghost story sailors tell each other when they're out on the water at night, the story that reminds them that the ocean doesn't always give up its secrets. And the idea of a ghost ship, a vessel drifting without its crew, has been burned into our imagination. The Flying Dutchman, the Octavius, the Baichimo, these are all ships with similar stories, tales of vessels found abandoned, sometimes reappearing years later, as if trapped in a cycle of endless wandering. And isn't that what makes the Mary Celeste so haunting? Oh, it was never wrecked, never destroyed. It just kept drifting. It wasn't a ship that sank to the depths, its mystery buried beneath the waves. Instead, it was found, intact, waiting, as if it had been left behind by something we still don't understand. And even though the Mary Celeste is long gone, scuttled off the coast of Haiti in 1885, its story still sails on. Every time someone tells a ghost ship tale, every time a movie or book revives its mystery, the Mary Celeste lives again. And maybe in the end, that's why we're still talking about it after all these years. Because some stories never sink. We've explored every corner of the Mary Celeste mystery, from the logical to the bizarre, from the evidence to the speculation. We've talked about the weather, the cargo, the possibility of foul play, and even the supernatural. But after all that, after all these theories, we still don't have a definitive answer. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly why this story still haunts us. So now I want to turn the question over to you. What do you believe happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste? Do you think this was a simple case of human error, a tragic misjudgment that led a seasoned captain and his crew to abandon their ship unnecessarily? Were they trying to escape an imagined explosion or a real but unseen disaster, only to be lost at sea? Or do you lean towards the idea that something darker happened? That maybe there was a mutiny, a hidden crime, or conspiracy that ended with an entire crew vanishing, leaving behind only the silent evidence of an untold story? And then, of course, there's the possibility that the answer lies beyond our understanding. Did the Mary Celeste encounter something? Something strange, something we can't quite explain. A force of nature that defies logic. A moment in time where reality shifted. A story so bizarre that we'll never truly know what happened that day. And if we did know, if we had a perfect answer, would we even want one? There's something about an unsolved mystery that captures the imagination in a way that no solved case ever could. The human brain hates loose ends, and yet we're drawn to them. The Mary Celeste isn't just a ghost ship. It's a story without an ending, a question without an answer. And maybe that's why we're still talking about it today. Because deep down, we love the unknown. We love that there are still things in this world that can't be explained. In a time where we can pull up information with a click, where every corner of the world feels mapped and explored, there's something thrilling about a mystery that refuses to give up its secrets. And maybe that's why the Mary Celeste, a ship that should have been just another forgotten merchant vessel, became a legend. So now I want to hear from you. What's your theory? Which explanation makes the most sense to you, and which one keeps you awake at night? Do you believe this was a simple tragedy? Or do you think the truth is something far stranger than we could ever imagine? If you've got thoughts, theories, or even your own ghost ship stories, reach out and share them. You can find me on X at David Culpepper. Send in your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think happened to the Mary Celeste, because the best thing about mysteries like this, they're never really over. Not as long as we're still talking about them. And something tells me we'll be talking about this one for a long, long time. And just like that, we've reached the end of our voyage into the mystery of the Mary Celeste. It's a story that has lasted over 150 years. And yet, here we are, still wondering, still searching, still trying to piece together an answer that might never come. We started with the eerie discovery, a ship found adrift in the Atlantic, its crew mysteriously gone, but everything else seemingly in place. No struggle, no distress signal, just silence. A ship without a crew, a journey without an ending. From there, we explored the theories, the logical, the possible, and the downright bizarre. Was it a natural disaster? A sudden panic over alcohol fumes? Mutiny? Pirates? Or something even stranger? Something that took the crew in a way we'll never quite understand? And through it all, we were left with the same questions that have haunted historians, sailors, and storytellers for generations. What could drive an experienced captain and crew to abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship? Why did they never return? And how does a mystery like this persist for so long without even a single piece of solid evidence to point us to the truth? Maybe that's why the Mary Celeste is more than just a mystery. It's a legend. It's a story that still sails the open sea, drifting in and out of history, just waiting for someone, maybe someone like you, to finally solve it. I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for tuning in today, for sticking with me through the theories, the speculation, and the eerie unknowns. These are the kinds of stories that linger in the back of your mind, the ones that creep into your thoughts late at night when the world is quiet and the questions start to rise. If you have your own thoughts on the Mary Celeste, I'd love to hear them. What theory makes the most sense to you? Do you lean toward science, or do you think there's something more to this mystery? You can reach out on X at David Culpepper, send in your own ideas, or even share your own favorite ghost ship stories. I read every message, and I love hearing what you all think, because at the end of the day, these mysteries belong to all of us. And of course, I have to thank May and Huck for keeping me company through this one. I'd like to think they were keeping an eye out for any supernatural activity while we recorded. So far, no growling or suspicious barking. So I guess we're in the clear. For now. May is looking at me like, will you wrap it up already? But we're not done yet, folks, because next time on Legends and Lore, we're leaving the high seas behind and heading deep into the dark, tangled woods of New Jersey's Pine Barrens. That's right, the Jersey Devil. A creature said to have haunted the forest for centuries, with sightings dating back to the colonial era. Some say it's a cursed child, born of a deal with the devil himself. Others believe it's something ancient, something that has been lurking in the wilderness long before humans ever set foot there. And of course, there's always the chance that it's something else entirely. Something that defies explanation. So if you love cryptid lore, eerie encounters, and the kind of stories that make you think twice before wandering into the woods at night, you won't want to miss this one. And hey, maybe May and Huck will have something to say about that one too. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep your eyes on the horizon. You never know what might be waiting just beyond the waves.